kuulijat, tervetuloa tähän miesten tasa-arvon järjestämään tasa-arvoisen maanpuolustuksen seminaariin. Mä oon Pasi Vuokko, mä oon sen yrityksen varapuheenjohtaja ja alustajina meillä tänään on Norjan sotilasasiamies Suomessa, prikaatikenraali Bjørn Solberg, näinhän se, this is the way you like to have it. Ja valtiotieteiden tohtori Kimmo Kiljunen, mihin Kimmo hävisi sinne. Joo. Solberg kertoo meille Norjan sukupuolineutraalista asevelvollisuudesta ja esityskielenä siinä esityksessä on englanti. Ja Kiljunen taas pohdiskelee Suomen asevelvollisuuden yleisyyttä.
Joo, hyvää iltapäivää, good afternoon. Minun nimeni on Juuso Erno, olen miesten tasa-arvo ryn puheenjohtaja ja haluan toivottaa teille kaikki tervetulleeksi tähän tasa-arvoinen maanpuolustusseminaariin. On behalf of the organizing association, Miesten tasa-arvo ry, I want to welcome you all to this seminar on national defense and gender equality. Tämä seminaari on itse asiassa osa Seminaarisarjaa, jonka Miesten tasa-arvo ry on tänä vuonna järjestänyt yhteistyössä Gender Egalitarian Finland ryn, Isät lasten asialla ryn ja Sukupuolten tasa-arvon tutkimusseura ryn kanssa. Ja tämä seminaarisarja on puolestaan sitten osa Suomen valtiollisen itsenäisyyden 100-vuotisjuhlaa. Aikaisemmissa seminaarisarjan osissa on käsitelty vuoroasumista, poikien huonompaa peruskoulumenestystä ja sukupuolten välisiä terveys- ja hyvinvointieroja. Ja tänään on siis aiheena maanpuolustus. Suomalaisen asevelvollisuusjärjestelmän epätasa-arvoisuus on ollut alusta lähtien keskeinen teema juuri Miesten tasa-arvo ry:lle, joka viettääkin ensi vuonna 10-vuotis syntymäpäivän juhlaansa. Toivomme siis, että tämän päivän antoiset esitykset ja vilkas keskustelu vaativat muutosta kohti tasa-arvoisempaa ja entistäkin tehokkaampaa ja uskottavampaa maanpuolustusta Suomessa. As we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Finnish independence, it is time to face the fact that our current conscription system is both unequal and outdated. Our Nordic neighbors, Norway and Sweden, have already reformed their defense arrangements. Hopefully today's presentations and discussion will speed up a process of change towards a more equal and more efficient national defense system here in Finland too. Thank you.
Hyvä. Mä laitan kiertämään tuommoisen osallistujalistan. Siellä on rasti, jos haluaa jäsenyydestä, on kiinnostunut vetää rasti sinne. Pannaan lista kiertämään. Ja sitten meillä on täällä kahvia, vettä ja myöhemmin siirrytään glögeihin, jos siltä tuntuu. Olkaa hyvä.
Thank you. I understand about half an hour talk and then questions. All up to you. I'm flexible on talking. If you need me to talk very long, I can also do that. My background, infantry officer, done the normal military stuff, but around 15 years ago I kind of branched out and ended up in security policy in the Ministry of Defense and ended up in 2008 this rank as the Deputy for Security Policy and had that for 5 years and went to Afghanistan a couple of years. So my last background is security policy, international operations, Afghanistan, coming in here to Helsinki. So I've been here now for a little more than 2 years and enjoy being in Finland very much. I'm going to give a little background. Why does Norway have national service conscription? And why is this not a big discussion back home? Because it has been in a number of countries. Sweden, for instance, took it down. Others have done the same, but they're also looking into taking it up again. So I will not focus too much about gender issues that may be driving politics. I will be focusing a little bit more on security requirements. Norway, similar nation when it comes to territory as Finland, a little larger because we have Spitsbergen, which is part of Norway, and also Jan Mayen, far out there. We are closing in on 5.3 million. We have a little bit more migration into Norway and Finland so far. We have a very long coastline. Depending a little on how much you go into details, our coastline is the second largest globally. Only Canada has a longer one. We started in NATO, April in 1949, a result after the Second World War, as I think also the Danes and Iceland at that time. We're not part of the EU, but we're participating extensively in the EU. So we are in a little different position than Finland, but quite close anyway. We also have what we call overseas territories. We don't talk too much about them. In Norwegian it's called biland, so it's not colonies because there don't live people there, penguins. But again, it is a growing responsibility where we also use some military capabilities to, I would say, support research in that area. And of course, that large continent is demilitarized for a limited period. It's only for research, but that will end around 30 years from now if they don't change kind of the tradition. The text far up to the right says something that our defense minister already close to 10 years ago said that NATO had to refocus, not only going to Afghanistan and Iraq and other places. We saw a number of growing security challenges closer to home. And I was part of writing that document, so this is why I'm saying that it's not kind of a recent issue where it's only about the Crimea and Russia going in, an ongoing confrontation, I would say, conflict in the Ukraine. It has a lower or longer perspective. And it's not only Russia. It is the Middle East, it's South. And this presentation I've used for many years, and in fact your current Minister of Foreign Affairs was in a delegation in Norway and I showed him this 8 years ago. So it's nothing new when I'm presenting this for you. Our assessment was that around this time, a little more than 10 years ago, something changed in politics in a number of countries. Not only in Moscow, a little in Beijing and other places also. And it's not necessarily that they are changing, but we from the West were using military forces and not succeeding in Afghanistan and not succeeding in Iraq and other places. And we're still there. So it was kind of an understanding of the world is changing. It's going from a bipolar to one big nation being responsible to a more dispersed responsibility for safety and security globally. And that influences us. And I'm saying that really in the old days, NATO was core for Norway. Less so in between, but it's growing again. And I think we've also, the last couple of years, gone into a discussion, is NATO the core defender of Europe? And is the EU more providing social safety around us? So it's a little different way of doing it. But it seems like also your Center of Excellence here in Helsinki is trying to merge those two organizations. They're not competing, they're trying to fulfill each other. For us, we have an economic zone outside our coast. And this is where we pick up our fish. This is where we pick up our oil and gas. This is also where the environmental responsibilities are, and so on and so on. I'm saying this because in Norway, the Coast Guard, to use that expression, is not part of the Ministry of Interior, it's part of the Navy. Our border guard between Norway and Russia is an infantry battalion, which is part of our army. Our search and rescue helicopters are part of the Air Force. Our surveillance capabilities are also part of the Air Force and Little Navy. So we are quite total defense oriented, but a lot of those capabilities that in Finland, for instance, under the Ministry of Interior or other places, are part of defense for us. And that also requires more personnel in daytime business than a lot of other countries. And we need smart people. The maritime economic zone, to use that expression, is about 7 times as large as our land territory. If you want to look at the Mediterranean, we cover more or less identically the same space as the whole of the Mediterranean. So when you go on vacation down south, just look at the map. Yes, that is what we cover in the North Atlantic every day. So we do a lot of running operations. A little about how we are organized. We have, of course, 3 core services, as in Finland. It's the Army, Navy, Air Force. Then we have a Home Guard, which is primarily land covering. And we have special forces, specialized branch, to use that expression, and also our communication, we call it cyber defense. So we have organized ourselves with 2-star general, 2-star admiral, 2-star general, 2-star general, 2-star general, 2-star general. So a little different than what you're used to, and there are people doing national service in all of them. Status, as we're now standing, we have around 20,000 employed in our defense forces, from Ministry of Defense to the battalion at the border to Russia, Coast Guard and so on. In Finland, you have kind of reduced from around 20,000, if you go a couple of decades ago, to around 12,000 today. You've outsourced a bit. We have also outsourced a bit and shrunk considerably during this peacetime period. But again, I'm saying this because if we go in the Army, and I can pop up again, we have also some units that are fully professional. They don't have people doing the national service. And then we have a mix, for instance, an armored battalion, a good mix of professional soldiers on tanks. But if you go to mechanized infantry, the leadership on an infantry fighting vehicle is primarily professionals, but the team, the soldiers we load off, are doing the national service. But again, we also have one fully professional mechanized battalion. They have currently a reinforced company in Lithuania as part of the forward deployed NATO battalions there. So yes, we do have a good mix. The Navy, all our ships, a combination of professional personnel and those doing national service, including on submarines. Air Force, pilots of course are professional, but those running the bases, a good combination. Same air defense, same command and control, surveillance. Home Guard, very much I would say your territorial forces, local forces in your army. It's about 45,000 in the Home Guard. They've done the national service, some young, some a little older. The core command and control and education part of it is professional people, some civilians, but most professional officers, NCOs. And we have close to 600 in the Home Guard. The rest, the 30 or 45,000, are called up on very short notice and used frequently, and most have a refresher week every year. The core part of those who are kind of volunteers, to use that expression, also get a limited salary. So some money in addition. And yes, when you're called in, there is a compensation. Of special forces, yes, we have some units recruiting in national service, including the last couple of years, a platoon only for females. But again, most of them highly professional. And we are a little larger than in Finland. Cyber defense, a good mix. Our budget, 55 billion Norwegian crowns next year. It seems like a little earlier this week, the government and some in parliament agreed on this. Haven't seen the finer specifications, and it hasn't gone through parliament formally, but €1 is currently a little more than 9.5 Norwegian crowns. So this is 5.678 billion euros. So similar to twice the size of the budget in Finland. Our national service, we call in around 10,000, give or take a little. And we definitely need about 8,000 as a minimum to keep our business running. And most of these units are committed in operational issues back home day to day. More so the Air Force and Navy, a little less the Army. But also Special Forces, Cyber are heavily engaged. And the Home Guard, as in Finland, are called in more or less as your defense is called in for EOD and search and rescue, looking for people. And so it's very similar. Our national service by law is 19 months. So those that are called in usually do 12 months, a little less than 12, but 12 months, that's the formality. Some volunteer and extended to 18 months. And the Army now is looking into extending some from 12 to 16 months. Those that are in the Home Guard are still being recalled within those 19 months. If we have a crisis, we can open up for endless, as in Finland. I'll go a little into history. Norway, of course, is in modern times a quite young nation, as in Finland. But again, the Danes were first in the Nordic countries to get a king covering their territory. We were number 2, and around 870, 80. It depends a little on how you count the details, but so a little more than 1,000 years ago. Before that it was small kingdoms, but he kind of conquered what was needed. And of course all these small kingdoms also had their armies and navies and similar, call it militia. The interesting part is, give or take a little, during the Viking period, the king around 950 by law said we need a, call it professional military structure called laydown. We have different kind of words for it here. The meaning was that those who owned land, meaning farmers, together had to have one ship available and man the crew. Trained soldiers. So a combination of Navy, Army. And that continued for more than 500 years. Then we saw the Hanseatic League kind of taking over trade in this region, including into this area. The laydown system with long ships and all that didn't function that well because the others had new technology, including cannon. So at that time we had merged as Sweden after the Black Plague and Norway under one king, and it was situated in Copenhagen. And this decision about creating a navy, in fact, happened around 10 years before Sweden left this union, the Kalmar Union. And that became a point professional mobilization navy. We continue with the army, separate one in Denmark, separate in Sweden, separate in Norway, by law. And then we started fighting primarily with Swedes. At that time, Sweden was part of Finland, also vice versa. So when we came into the 30-year war, where you sent your kappa per liter down to Germany primarily, and succeeding tremendously, we established our current army structure in 1628 with regiments, a combination of professional people and mobilization. So for us, I'm saying that national service is nothing new. At times, it's gone a little up and down, how much people we call in, how much professional leadership we have. So this is kind of the old tradition. I could also say a little about, if you go back to Viking era, females could own land. We had a law that said that we have to gather those who own land every year at a ting, meaning call it parliament. In Iceland they have the oldest one, kind of adopted from the Norwegian part of it, late 800s. Alting, same from Western Norway. And by law, all men owning land had to show up in July every year. But also females could show up, but they were not had to. It was up to if they wanted to. And also if you had handicaps, meaning you couldn't walk, but you owned land, you were excluded. You didn't have to go. But we know that also females at that time could follow, call it Viking raids or trades, going to new places, armed. Same, armed back home. So we've had a tradition where girls, young women, mature women can defend themselves. As we become a little bit more Christian, that was reduced slowly. And around 1600, under Christian IV, they lost all authorities to own things, inherit things. So it was either the husband, a brother, or a father that kind of had control over them. So I'm saying that religion necessarily haven't been a beneficial issue for ladies. I'll end up a little. You were one of the very early countries where females got the possibility to vote. And if I'm not mistaken, 1907.
We were the first.
In fact,
getting the all
New Zealand, in fact, a little earlier than you,
yeah,
and parts of Australia.
Yeah, but we were the first that female get the whole, like the
Correct.
all the rights to
Yes.
to vote and be member of the parliament as well. And, yeah.
We followed you and did the same in 1913, but it took us a little time. It was a limited possibility to vote for females in 1901 in my country, but you had to be either you owned something or you had you were paid in a job and you paid taxes at a certain level. If you did not kind of own something or pay taxes, or your husband paid taxes, you did not have the possibility to vote in 1901. Local elections. So it took us a little time to change this, very similar to what you did in Finland. Second World War, we were occupied after a couple of months, also including losing northern part of Norway. We established kind of a resistance. Some went to Sweden, and after a couple of years established, call it police units in light infantry. And yes, we established again a new Navy, Air Force and an army up to brigade level in the UK. Yes, at that time we lacked manpower, so females had the ability to be part of our military structure in uniform. Then when we came back to Norway with our military forces, as part of being on the alliance, we were ordered to send a brigade to Germany, and we did that in 46 and did it up until we saw Russia is becoming our Soviet Union, a more challenging adversary. So we stayed there until 1953 and rotated the brigade every half or 6 months. The first couple of rotations we had females as soldiers going to Germany. Then it became a more challenging issue politically, and especially a number of female politicians said we shouldn't do that. So yes, they lost that possibility, I would say, to be part of our military structure for a limited period. But that made it easier again to kind of re-establish this in the 70s. And I'm now 59, and yes, females on a volunteer basis could be in our military structure when I started in uniform. And just after I started, we opened all positions in our military structure. And we had in NATO the first female fighter pilot, we had the first commander of a submarine, and so on and so on. Today we have 2 admirals, 2-star admirals, females. The commander of the Air Force is a female, 2-star. The former chief of the Home Guard, 2-star female. The deputy or chief of staff for the army, 1-star female. And I know all of these ladies, so we've kind of developed this over time. Last time we changed the job. 3 female admirals generals applied for that job. They didn't get it, but it was quite a tough competition. Same when we changed our representative in Brussels for our delegation for NATO, 3-star job. 3 ladies applied for it, only 1 male applied. He got it, but again, he's been very much in NATO before. So, but again, it's been very competitive. So those who now have leading positions, I wouldn't say that they are favored due to gender politics. It's kind of equal rights, and yes, if they're qualified, why not? We've been struggling with getting females, not into special forces, but into the very sharp, call it light infantry role. And this has to do primarily with physical qualifications. To try to facilitate this, a couple of years ago we called in voluntary a female platoon, and it's extremely tough. So they're, I would say, tested at the boundaries of what is doable, and they are succeeding. But still, physical issues in certain jobs, as firefighters, I think, we are a little different physically. Mentally, we see these succeeding very much better than males. So we're very happy with the current situation. We had a requirement for changing a little a legal issue on national service. It took us a couple of years until we kind of merged 3 laws into one and sent it in 2013 to Parliament. In Parliament, they said, well, we should have an additional adjustment, meaning equal rights for national service. Not only volunteering for females, but equal rights and responsibilities. So it was Parliament deciding that yes, this new law should be changed. So it is Parliament pushing the issue, not government, even if the government supported it. So this law was implemented by decision in 2014 and executed by 1st of January 15. Of course, it takes a little time to change systems. The first female batch, I would say, was called in July 2016, not being voluntary but called in. And our recruiting camp for the Air Force and Navy, which is outside Stavanger, called in around 1/3 female, 2/3 male. Army has a little different system. A lot of it is up north. A little more than 20% were female called in, a little for different units. We haven't lost more females than males during those 10,000 to 8,000. We have an evaluation not identical to the one you have for every call-in in Finland, but quite similar. And I would say we get even better response for the females on an average than males. We started testing a system. Is it smart or doable to have mixed rooms? We did that in our battalion on the Russian border. And yes, for those who are a bit younger than me, could in fact theoretically have been my grandchildren, but they seem to like equal rights, yes, living in mixed rooms. If you don't want to have that, you can have separate rooms. When it comes to tension, discrimination, using those words, there is less in the mixed rooms than if they live separate. Of course, we have some challenges about showers and all that, because infrastructure is infrastructure. So the only place we shift a little is showers, limited period for males, limited period for females. But the rest is all open. Give an example again, this border guard battalion, they have a main camp and go out in patrols. It is usually a sergeant or corporal doing the national service, team of 8 usually, and they are sent out, come back 5-6 days afterwards. So they live in mixed tents, functions very well. We have a lot of nations coming with delegations looking at this function or not. Is it doable for us, other Brits, Americans, Germans or others? Again, I think traditions, culture varies. This is why I took this long kind of, because we come from a little different traditions. I think in Finland also, southern part of Finland is not necessarily the same as Lapland. So it is a little also for us where you come from. We see that some of migrating population see this as a little alien, I would use that expression. If your parents or grandparents or Muslims came from Pakistan in the 1960s, 70s, even if they are their grandchildren or children now are doing national service, we see there is a certain level of tension for my daughter living together with a Christian guy in a tent. So we see a little of that. But again, it's a maturing kind of issue, I think. And again, for us, since we don't call in more than 10,000, we have very tough limitations, I would say. We pick the best. So if you're not physically well, or your sights are bad, or allergies, or sickness, and you're out. And if you don't qualify after a couple of weeks, you're out. So we call in around 10,000, but we need only 8,000. So we accept that quite early, you're out. We have more people who would like to do the military service than what we need. Again, a little as for you. These are only examples that we are doing operations 24/7. Again, our intelligence ship, maritime patrol, Coast Guard, Navy, Special Forces, those patrolling. But again, for us, this is not only for covering national responsibilities, it's also part of being the flank for NATO. Most of our military operations are up north or at sea. Up to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's interesting to hear these things, how gender equal the system in Norway is. In Finland we have the system actually telling us that the worst of the males is better than the best of the ladies in conscription point of view, and that's a bit silly, I think. That's why it's good to hear how these things are arranged in Norway. I like it.
We've just had, I think they left Rovaniemi yesterday, but we've been participating with the battery, not guns, but radars and forward observers and so on. It's around 80 soldiers and 40 vehicles going from Setamo, because they left yesterday or are leaving this morning. Because there is a similar exercise back home again, and it's 1,000 kilometers away, so it takes a little time to readjust and sleep a little. That starts on Monday, but 2 days ago you had what we call a Distinguished Visitors Day. I was not there because I was here in Helsinki in the defense staff and MOD, but I was talking to them in Rovaniemi, the leadership, last week. And I got a feedback from your Chief of the Army yesterday evening. And yes, those exercises together, I think, is of interest. And yes, you also see that for us, having kind of mixed gender in different units is quite easy. And the artillery battalion commander was here earlier this week. And she's a female lieutenant colonel. Very smart lady.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think very often it's up here.
Yeah.
But again, physical issues are certain limitations in a number of jobs also in the military. But if you're a fighter pilot, it could be smarter to be small than big. So yes, there are some advantages also for females.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah, I would wonder that what's the current public opinion towards this gender equality in military service, and during the debate of the preparing for the role, what were the opinion for those against this?
Let's put it this way, and I'm not comparing, but you've seen based from Hollywood the last month plus with Me Too, kind of discrimination and stuff. My gut feeling is, and I'm not kind of comparing it, but I think if you were male and in parliament or in leadership of any political party, when this proposal from parliament came in 2014, and you kind of said, I'm dead against this, then you're in deep shit. So it's also kind of a positive wave. But when you then talk to mature ladies and ask them personally, would you like that your daughter goes and has her military service? I'm not married, but I have two brothers who are married and have kids. And I know them very well and others. Would you like to have your daughter doing military service? And again, some say, I'm a bit skeptical. Others say, it's all up to them. So I think we've come to a period where it's, if you like to go, you can go, if you qualify. My youngest brother is now 55, his wife a little younger. Their oldest daughter was called in for the screening when she was 18 some years ago, and did the physical test and all that stuff, and interviews, and the guy interviewing her in uniform said that, you know, Ragnhild, you're slim, you're in okay physical conditions, but you have to run more and have to have a little kind of training for muscles if you want to be part of a military structure. And then she said, well, you know, I'm applying to study medicine, become a doctor. And then, yes, we will call you in 2 years after you've started your studies because we need more doctors. And once you're finished with your basic training to become a doctor, we'll call you in again. So that's kind of the dialogue on it. But again, we have a screening part, as you do for males and females who volunteer for us. We started that screening part before this law was talked about. So it's 7 years ago we started that. All that are around 18 have to fill in on a computer system as you do. Allergies, education, all those things you don't get from schools and police and all that stuff. So additional information. And then we pick also a little on motivation, around 25,000, and do the interviews, evaluations, medical tests and all that stuff. And out of those again we pick what we need, 10,000. But also motivation, and you have to say where you want to go. Navy, you want to go to the border guards, to artillery, so on. So it's a little about what people would like to do, because we have enough people.
Yeah, yes.
How do you maintain the commitment of those people who are in the reserves or in the home guard? You mentioned something about compensation for them.
Yeah.
How do you keep their motivation up?
Well, since our national service is up to 19 months, by law, we need you, you're called in. So that's one issue. The other part is we, from all services, after after a limited period where we don't need them for add-on personnel, then we transfer them to the Home Guard. And the Home Guard try to recruit locally because we have kind of similar as regiments. Then we like to put the qualifications into what we need in the Home Guard. So the Army is small for us. I would say on a day-to-day basis, we have more professionals in our Army than you have in your Army, which is 200,000. So for you, 95% of the mobilization part of the Army is reservists. For us, most is in place already, but then we expand to full manning and also reserves for those, because if we end up in some sort of conflict, you lose people. So that part of it is there. We do have a couple of completely mobilization battalions, but again, we have a small army. And the Navy, all our ships are sailing, except some are in maintenance. When it comes to the Coast Guard, we have 2 crews for all ships. So they sail on an average 270 days at sea every year. So for us, our peacetime structure is quite similar to our wartime structure with an add-on. So a number of those who are called in for doing military service have done their kind of service. A number are called in and go into the Home Guard, depending a little on where you live. Because if you live in northern Norway, only about 10% of the Norwegian population live north of the polar circle. In Finland, about 1.5% live north of Ravaniemi, to use that expression. And yes, you need also military presence there when you mobilize. Same for us. Finnmark, a little more than 75,000. The size of Finnmark is the same as Denmark. So yes, we have army units there, but the Home Guard has a limit to how much you can take in from the civilian population. So for us, if you live in Finnmark, yes, you're in the Home Guard until you are pensioned off. If you're in Oslo, we don't need you that much.
2 kysymystä oli sulle ja sitten...
Yes, the word I was looking for earlier was that Finland had the first general and equal suffrage, and it was in 1906. Yeah, but the question was, my question was this, that the last equal research of Finnish Army was published now in the beginning of this November. And still, according to the study, still many of the female have to go through bullying or even sexual harassment in Finnish Army. So have you, in Norway, is there made any like similar kind of studies or research about this?
But again, I think the questions are a little different, because as in Finland, you kind of ask the right questions and you keep it year by year.
Yeah.
Get kind of a change of statistics.
Yes.
We've done a little of that, and yes, we've had, call it bullying, call it Me Too, similar. I think as there are more females now than it was, we're trying to get rid of it, but I would say it's changed quite a bit the last number of years. Since I've been abroad since summer of 2013, the details in kind of the atmosphere I don't get quite that well, but I would not say on a personal level that yes, there may be some challenges, but I think I wouldn't say we've cracked the code, but at least we've gone quite far. And I think the ability to, you can call a separate telephone number, you can send a letter, there is kind of an alternative way, so that if there is a problem, it is doable to inform it. Similar in the military structure as in most of government. But again, I would not say that we still have some NCOs, officers, private soldiers, also professional ones, who are arrogant bastards and may on certain occasions behave bad. I think it's the same in hospitals. I think it's the same in many other parts of the government. So I'm not trying to say that yes, this is kind of the ideal situation, but I think we've come a little further than a lot of other countries. But again, I'm not saying that you should try to adapt our solution. We have one tradition, one culture, one set of operational requirements, and that's why I've talked a little about, yes, we have a lot of ongoing operations, and I think that makes it a little easier than only training.
One part of our current discussion is about that everyone should have some kind of obligatory service, military national service or civil national service. Do you have civil service left in Norway?
We had, if you don't go to the military, then you have to have a civil service. We took it away a couple of years ago because nobody was using it, and it was the Minister of Interior responsible for it. So, and I think since people are, in general are positive to the military, and we have more who would like to come in than the places we have, kind of the problem, I wouldn't say evaporated, but it kind of disappeared indirectly. But again, during the Cold War, and especially after 1968 kind of revolution with people not necessarily liking military service, yes, we had an alternative civil service, 16 months, and if you didn't do it, and you were still physically fit and you didn't go to the Army or Navy or Air Force, you went to jail. And yes, we had a problem with the UN based on that. So we had court cases. Why do you put people who haven't really broken any law in jail and they sit there for 15 months?
You had a problem with that?
We did.
It seems we are not having a problem. Though the situation is the same.
Yeah, but again, it kind of evaporated when the Marxist-Leninist kind of opposition, I would say, that were communists to start with, and then against NATO, kind of Soviet Union, US, Vietnam. And then when the Soviet Union started to having a dialogue with the Americans, late 70s into the 80s, about armament and all that stuff, then the focus was China. But again, there were not that many out there. But for a limited period, when I was at platoon level, late 70s, our Marxist-Leninists, young, they were given orders to go into the military and sabotage. So yes, we've had some challenges, as I think Finland has seen a little the same also. But again, this kind of alternative threat, if you don't go in and do your national service, we don't have that currently. I'm not saying it's going away. Our laws are still there if we need it, but we don't execute them.
Thank you very much. It's been interesting to hear how it's done in Norway.
I can still have one question before I go to my presentation. Can you put the first slide, or was it the second one, when you have the conceptual situation in terms of security situation in Europe? That one. No, that one. That was it then the following one? What was the next one then? Exactly this one. These are somewhat the same. How you are defining this period of success compared to the unstable peaks? Are you speaking in terms of the global system, or are you speaking about the European security system? If you are speaking the latter one,
I think primarily in our region.
European, yes.
And again, if you talk about politicians,
Yeah.
especially ministers of finance,
Yeah.
it's quite quiet. Nobody is threatening you or potentially threatening you, and we don't have to use that much money on defense. We can use it for schools, and So yes, a little on that period. This is why I said brackets and question. I think everybody wanted that. Okay, hallelujah, we're going in the right direction, more idealistic. Russia is going to be a good friend and partner and all that.
They even wanted to join NATO, Russia.
Something was mentioned here.
Yeltsin period, yes, exactly.
But again, we saw something, and it's not only Russia. It is globally. And I think it's not necessarily NATO, it's primarily, I think, their view on the US. Around that time, after a couple of years of 9/11, Bush didn't succeed. It was picked up a lot of places.
Yes, if you implied, a little bit introduction already in my presentation, if you really imply that in terms of defense budget, disarmament processes in global terms, confidence building measures being activated by OEC, as well as even the issue of conscription army transformation, that is true, it's a period of success. But in terms of, that's not exactly...
Depends a little on
if
your
you
perspective.
say that one compared to what later on, but if you speak about our own security situation in Europe, in concrete warfare cases, I'm so sure, can you really say that that 15-year was successful compared to the later period from 2005 to today, because you had a Balkan Wars,
of course,
and you even had the bombings by NATO, one capital in Europe, transforming and changing the borders against OEC principles, as we know, on that particular period, including also those problems of Transnistria, including the South Caucasus, etc., etc. So in terms of warfare, during that period compared to today in Europe, I suppose it's a bit brave to say that it was success. But
that's what I'm saying, brackets.
True.
It's very difficult to kind of pinpoint directly what is it we saw changing. But again, we produced a small document. We very often call it a non-paper if it's not formalized, but we circulated it. And this is a visual presentation. It was a document, and we presented this in February 2008 in NATO, and it was in Estonia. At that time, everybody was expanding in Afghanistan, for instance. Nobody, meaning, for instance, London, Berlin, Paris, really wanted to see that, yes, the world is changing relatively dramatically close to us. And again, Georgia here, we didn't put that just around Georgia, but as you know, there was a conflict there, early August 2008. So we kind of presented this before some events popped up. And again, we did the same with your current Minister of Foreign Affairs. I used the same slide, and also the other one you mentioned. And he said, "Do you really believe that it's developing that way?" So we had a discussion, was in the Finnish embassy in Oslo. And yes, we said, that is how we see it currently. The world is changing around us. And sooner or later, we will have a problem where we need to focus more on our ability to protect our safety and security.
You are saying the world is changing around us,
Of course.
but we are on the borderline, and that's why we are always asking the question that if you want to have a secure border, it must be so that both sides are feeling the secure border.
Of course.
And now obviously we should always try to also understand our geopolitical position. What is the opponent's eye? We might not agree with their position, but in order to create the security in the border, we should understand from that angle too. Because we have a 1,324 kilometer long border with Russia, which is much longer than you have, obviously from us the major question, if they would have a similar type of mapping, how they would say the situation in terms of threat. And it would be interesting to have actually with that one, take it back, to say with those circles, how it would look from Russia's point of view, where they would put those dangers coming vis-a-vis their security concept as they feel. They would almost say the same. For them, NATO is a potential threat because they have their history, starting from Napoleonic War and other expansions coming from West all the time. We know also that they can attack very seriously if they so want. Nevertheless, from their point of view, it might be so that there are approachment coming from the West towards their border. It's a threat. And that's why it's not only that we can say that outside world is reacting, but what we are doing, but what you are doing in terms of maybe destabilizing those situations. The similar issue is from us now when we are discussing the defense policy strategy here. Are we doing mistakes maybe on our side which might polarize the situation? It's always better to think what you have done myself, what I have done myself, in order to improve the security situation than saying only that our problem is outside. That was my question.
If you're sitting in Moscow, you look at a very, very long border covering from the North Pole along Europe, what we very often call the Stan countries, north of Afghanistan and China. And then the US with Alaska and Bering Straits. After close to 40 years of discussion, in 2011 signed an agreement with Russia. We kind of split it 50-50. They have one model, we have another. And the Russian mentality is if he gains anything, I must lose. So it's kind of zero-sum approach. So we divided it 50-50. But it took us 40 years. From the 1970s until 2011. So it's a little about continuity. And I think seen from Moscow, the Kola Peninsula is core for their strategic retaliation capability. St. Petersburg is core, Moscow is core, and could be not just the same, but it's important. And then you have the same to the Pacific. So yes, there are some hotspots for them that are core. But again, I don't think that Norway ever has represented a threat for Russia, as I don't think Finland in modern times ever has posed a threat to Russia, and I don't think Estonia has ever proposed a threat to Russia. So in my view, if you look at the overall really big picture, Moscow on the strategic leadership, both political, media and also military intelligence, are quite comfortable with a relatively stable situation in Europe. But again, currently, and this of course is a totally different topic, but yes, we now see that they are using media, cyber, to split a little on NATO, split a little in some countries, split a little on the EU side, and so on and so on. You have a center of excellence that is good at looking at that, so I will not try to say what they are doing, but yes, they are being a spoiler currently. But again, this is a kind of different play than the conventional military part of it. And again, I agree, you have a very long land border, and you have a limited maritime border. We have a 196 land border, but we have a longer border with the economic zone with Russia than any other European country, including Finland.
Yeah, of course. From Finland point of view, if I put only in a nutshell the issue, you're absolutely right. Finland itself, from Russia's point of view, they understand very well it's not a threat, seriously. We cannot and we will not. It's absolutely clear. We absolutely are that position. The major issue now is bigger about the domestic discussion debate in Finland is, do we ever are in a situation that some outside forces could utilize Finnish territory against Russia? And that's the problem. That's a key issue. That has been the key issue for Finnish foreign policy since starting independence and throughout the history. Because the problem in Finnish security, the pages of Finnish history, have been those pages when outside forces have fought their wars and involved Finland in those situations. And that's obviously the choice what we should very carefully think how we are placing ourselves in the global and in European security structure, so that also the neighbors, neither Sweden nor Russia, would feel that our territory would be used against them, because there are outside forces who are using them. And that's a challenge for us to think all the time. If we are really serious on our security situation, there might be other reasons that we are allying here and there, but if you're security-wise, that's the concept, of course, to take up. But that's stuff
Back
we
to
already...
conscription.
Yeah. No, let's go to conscription.
Short answer,
Yeah.
please.
I'll be very short. I think very often we have a tendency of looking at history, and of course Finland has a history, Winter War, Continuation War, Lapland War, but we have the same. We were invaded and occupied for 5 years. I think the military capabilities today is not the same as it was that you use tank armies conquering territory. I think it's more long-range missiles, airplanes, naval ships. So in fact, if we have a conflict, you don't necessarily have to have people on the country's territory.
That's true.
Of course, a country, if doable, like to also protect their sovereignty, which is not only land territory and the population, it is also airspace and the maritime domain. And I think another issue, if we now look at Yemen, yes, there is an ongoing conflict there with two pots, the government and the opposition, to use that expression. They're sponsored from Saudi Arabia on one side and Iran on the other side. And the population really has a critical situation with blockades, and I think in the future we may see that you kind of pressure politicians totally differently than we did in the old days. We are seriously concerned about a blockade for our region. This is why NATO now is establishing borders for covering the North Atlantic again. And that blockade is not because the country goes in and occupies Norway. it has to do with their strategic nuclear and air capabilities to block the traffic across the Atlantic. And of course Finland is at the inner part of that. So I think when we talked with our colleagues, it's very well understood that very often media and politicians and historians have a tendency of looking at what's happened decades ago and not necessarily at the current situation and what is going to be the technology solutions for the coming decades.
Good. Maybe I say only one sentence further concerning your conceptualization, but that also relates to this conscription army discussion in our country, where warfare is very much technologized. There's new techniques which are used, and you really use the wording that modern warfare is not so much a mass army attacking or defending the borders. It's much more cyber war. It's much more using air forces, etc., etc. And interesting enough, when you were saying that the Pax NATO, as you said, the peace period, or Pax Romana, if it's in earlier stages when somebody is dominating, has changed because the other powers have started to play the game. That is absolutely true. There are other forces. Nevertheless, the concept that we have in our mind when we are starting to discuss of cyber war is that suddenly we recognize that Russia, maybe China, maybe some other countries are also using that technology where we in the West have been overwhelming in already 50 years, half a decade, etc., etc. All the basic mass media in the global terms is controlled by us, by West. And that's why it's a challenge when somebody else is using the same way. We do have the basic way of discussing about the security because that's dominating already by certain type of approaches like you described there earlier. Interesting figure only also about the modern warfare is that since 2015, the leading country in the world which is using 45% of the military expenditures in the world, that country has bombed in 9 countries. 2015 today, 9 countries have been bombed by that particular country. We don't discuss that, we don't recognize that one. The warfare is going all the time. That's why for me it's always a bit question that how we define the wars. Obviously we are looking at the European concept, and we have more the broader. You can see from other angles also that how the warfare is in global terms going on. But that's obviously a discussion when we are speaking about the war in global terms. Our theme here was obviously today to discuss about the conscription army itself, and that's thanks very much for your description on the Norway situation. I wanted to say only a few things because we are quite late already. The idea of conscription army itself, when you create a so-called national service, is quite novel in historical terms, although you had a history from the even Viking times that you try to mobilize all manpower, etc., etc. But principally it's from the French Revolution. It's from 1789, after the French Revolution, they created the mass army concept, and they also changed the army structure so that those who were in officer positions were actually professionals. They're much more professionals than earlier. And that's why the French army was in Napoleon. It was quite successful a short period. Then it broadened to Prussia and other areas, the conscription systems. And then it came as the most popular, if you speak in European terms, not necessarily in the global terms, in 19th century and 20th century. That has been the core of the army structures in different countries. Interesting enough, and that's actually your description is absolutely correct, that when the Cold War period ended, that system changed. Military budget changed, you are right, but also the idea of do we need really conscription army type of structures, like we do have in Finland still exist. In 1990, out of those times, later on, 27 European Union member countries, 28 today, 23 had actually conscription army at the end of Cold War period. 23, so clear majority had actually conscription army. The major shift obviously took place already in the 1990s, early 2000, when today actually we do have, in terms of European Union countries, if I'm very precise, actually there are only 2 countries which really have a conscription in the traditional way of understanding. Maybe 3, Cyprus might be also Greece and Finland. Turkey obviously is a European country which has a conscription army, Switzerland also. In Austria, for example, in Denmark, in no type of situation where you principally have a conscription system. In Austria, for example, only 15% of the people goes army, and there's no punishment. There's no punishment whatsoever if you don't go, so that's why it's not actually that way obligatory like in Greece, like in Finland still today. So Finland is somewhat lacking in terms of the process which has taken place in European countries, although we know that in most recent years there have been debates in Lithuania, in Sweden also, should they return back to the conscription system, etc. But principally they haven't, and their armies are, let's say, more professional, or they are selective conscription systems that you are clearly major part of the young men, particularly, don't go army at all. And that's still interesting discussion in Finland, why we are clearly lacking the overall development which has taken place in the European Union. Of course, the symbolic way is in 2002 was important when France deleted the conscription system, because that was the first country to establish it in 1789. So obviously that was a major new thinking in European terms. Why? Why these changes? Maybe partly, but as you explained, the overall polarized situation in Cold Wars over, and similar type of threat concepts which were earlier used went actually practical one, and that eased the situation. That's why your definition there, it was a period of success in the terms is maybe true, and that's a reason that you said that conscription army is not necessarily useful in terms of the military threats and problems. Also, the military threats was clearly something else than mass armies potentially attacking. It was much more environmental concerns that might be, those might be ungovernable and unstable migration situations, states dissolving, like in Europe we saw, etc. It's a local, very localized problems, conflicts, etc., etc. So the traditional method of that you whole your manpower is mobilized to defend the country and using army was somewhat obsolete. It wasn't so necessary. These might be the reasons. But another reason, of course, was very clearly so that armies, and you know it much better than me when you saw the pictures there, is much more technical than earlier. Earlier it was so much needed manpower. Nowadays it's less manpower needed and more technique. And then you need professionals. Those navy systems, maritime systems, etc., they are technically so advanced that it's not the conscripts who can use it straight away. They need lots of training, and usually professionals who are capable of being pilots or etc. So that's why also the technical change was there. That demand in terms of the defense was more in techniques than manpower itself. And that's why the conscription concept was somewhat an obsolete one. Another reason, of course, was that the basic areas where our defense forces were used in Norway and Finland also were international crisis management situations, peacekeeping operations. There also it was very clear that you need more somewhat professionally involved people than conscripts, and that obviously put the pressure down. But maybe the major issue in our debate today is clearly so, which would depend also that we should say bye-bye for the conscription system, is the equality issue. Are we gender equality, but generally also equality issues? And in very many countries it has been taken up the issue that why the conscription is for male and not for female. Because it's not for female, it's not a fair system. You were right when you said about this general suffrage about Finland in 1907, that Finland was the first country in the world giving full sovereign rights for female in terms of politics. In New Zealand, Australia, you mentioned earlier, you were right, they got earlier right to vote.
But in Finland, it was the first country, although we were part of Russia, because we were an independent country, we could, female could stand also as a candidate for the parliament. So that was the major change. The full political rights for female was the first country here.
That was the time that also the majority of the males get the rights.
Of course, that's absolutely
Not
correct.
only the,
That's correct position.
Yeah.
That's of course, we are so frequently speaking that the general full sovereign rights suffrage was only for female. No, it was actually the majority of men was out. They couldn't either be voting and be candidate. That's very important for France to say, because that's clearly so. But that's one example where Finland has been very advanced. So in our country, obviously, debate goes very much around that question: are men and female, male and female equals in terms of conscription? And nowadays the debate goes very much so that, okay, the problem is there, so what we should do, we should extend our national service so that also females are somewhat obliged to go to army. And that you create an overall national service, whatever way you are doing it, but it should be obliged both for male and female. That's now the tendency here to as if guarantee the equality. My position is totally different. I have also been member of parliament earlier and I have argued it very loudly there also that I don't understand that. If the gender equality issue is taken seriously, now you have made it voluntary for female to go to army, and 400 females annually are going among the 20,000 which are in service in army. 400 are females. The question goes the other way around. I would like to argue that, okay, if female have right to be voluntary to go to army, why we shouldn't allow the same for male? Particularly taking into consideration the development in overall Europe, where the conscription system is obsolete. It's absolutely so obsolete. So in a few countries, as I already mentioned, Greece, Turkey, Finland, Switzerland in a specific way, which have the full-fledged conscription. Around 70-80% depends annually of the age group of Finnish male goes to army, which is very high indeed, and that's good. Estonia has also, so that's but they are also only 50. That's a similar system like in Austria, if I understood Estonia, so 20% of the male anyhow goes to the army, although it's a conscription army. So that is the debate in our country today, and I would like very much to propose it the other way around, that yes, let's be having a gender equality, but in a way that it would be voluntary also for male to go to army. There are some other issues which are interesting also in terms of the fairness on equality issue. It's not only the gender issue. We have two specific exceptions in terms of our conscription system. And those are Åland Islanders, the small Åland Island. We have 27,000 people living in Åland Island. Those Åland Islanders male are excluded. It's not necessary for them to go to Finnish army. It's a very specific autonomous position, demilitarized zone there by international treaties. Still one could ask why actually certain area can be outside, why not? And there's another area also, it's a Jehovah's Witnesses, specific, how would say in English? Jehovah's Witnesses, who have, by law have a right not to go to conscription army. And there are lots of people who are asking why you are defending one philosophy, if I put it very broadly, one religious group on that situation. Very many pacifists, people who are pacifists, are very devoted for that understanding that they cannot kill anybody, whatever situation is. That's almost like a religion then. Why we have absolute pacifists, and it's a really strange situation that you put those people in the prison. We have something like 70, 80 people annually who refuse also to go to civil service, and most of them have to go to prison. Today's world conviction, full conviction, I don't want to kill anybody in no situation. I must be Buddhist, I must be pacifist, whatever way, he had to go to army. This is totally anachronism of today's world and non-acceptable. Civil service, you asked a question about civil service and army service. Do you have in Norway civil service or not? And you answered your situation. Of course, it's not necessary for you to have the civil service, because it's more or less voluntary in your country. You're not punishing anyone who somebody is saying that I don't go to army, you don't punish him. In Finland, obviously, civil service is, to be very honest, it's a punishment.
Yes.
It's a punishment.
Stage.
And it's even longer than normal military service for them. It's 1 year altogether. So it's clearly not to go to prison, you go to the civil service, which is one type of punishment. This is very strange that this country still, as civilized it is, as developed it is, still have this type of obsolete attitudes in this area of military services. And that's why I'm proposing, not only from the egalitarian gender equality aspects, but also in general aspects, that you should transform our system. Thank you very much.
Kiitos.
Sitten onko tähän kommenttia kysyttävää? Kiitos Kimmo esityksestä, ja se oli näppärästi vedetty englanniksi.
Niin.
Eikä teidän ollut suositeltua.
No, mutta kaikki ymmärsivät englanniksi, ja it was nice, but you could also follow it by English.
Veli.
I can add to your list the Jehovah's Witnesses and Åland Islanders one Finnish First Nation people Sami, why they have to do, because they have never fight. Yes, at the beginning of the 20th century, they didn't have to original law go to army. Now, it's the same kind of example.
Yes, if you take specific groups, but I mean, my approach is very clearly so that you shouldn't say that certain groups haven't fought, etc. My family hasn't ever have been in warfare, so then I would have also the same rights if Sami people haven't, etc. We can argue. I think so that as long as we still have an army structures in the country, we are not going to do professional armies, which is one way which how to in very many countries, more developed countries done. Then it should be a voluntary for everybody. So who wants goes, they are motivated and they can contribute on that area and contribute positively in that area. And who don't want, please let's allow them to do the other way around. Being the female, males, Åland Islanders, Jehovah's Witnesses, whoever, Sami, whoever, having equal treatment for everybody. Then it would be a general system and proper and fair. That's my own position.
Little comment.
Yeah.
I'm of course interested in history, and I fully support that. Yes, the French Revolution kind of changed Central Europe, but not in our region, because all these countries in this region had a long tradition for national service, a little bit more specific, and some more professional. But again, this was kind of the Central Europe challenge, to use that expression. So I disagree a little when we go into details. The other part is, if you look at mass mobilization, if you don't train people over an extended period, that has changed with technology through history. If you really wanted to have somebody being good militarily in the really old days, where you used kind of swords, bows, arrows and stuff, you had to train for many years to be good, not only for 6 months or 1 year. The British longbows soldiers had to train a minimum of 12 years to become good. So yes, they were extremely professional, to use that expression. If you go at artillery, gunpowder, on ships, for instance, or fortifications, they usually had a training to be good for up to 20 years. If you are on an artillery gun today, you can do it within weeks and months.
Are you speaking of the medieval times?
I'm saying that this has changed considerably through periods of, I would say, technology. And my even on communication, if you go into handling a high-frequency radio, if you go 15 years back in time, it was a lot more sophisticated to operate it when I was younger than it currently is today. So I would say we are moving into a period where it's quite easy to have young people manning weapon system, communication systems, even in the medical field, a lot easier than only a couple of decades ago. So I would say that type of discussion about national service, limited period, compared to being professional, I necessarily don't agree. We have a number of defense allergies in Oslo, for instance, and some cover also Finland. They're very interested in the Finnish model, as they are in the Norwegian model. And for us, picking the best, and I think you are very selective also, we don't see some of the serious challenges, as for instance the Brits, the Dutch, the Germans, where you don't get the best of your population. It takes a lot of time to train people who are at the lowest kind of level of expertise very often and recruit them in as soldiers. So I'm saying that this is not easy to compare. Our naval ships, for instance, are so-called lean manning compared to American ships. We very often have 2.5 times as less manning on board a ship when they're doing national service than being professional on US or British ships, which are so-called professional. So it's a difference of what you recruit in. So I'm not saying that our solution is definitely the best. On a political level, if you do more expeditionary operations, I think it's very comfortable to have professional units because the risk is not on the political level, it's on a personal level for those who signed up. So I think it's... So I'm not having a big discussion with you, I'm only saying that there are different perspectives of looking at it, and I'm primarily looking not from a political level, but from a more technological skill level. So I'm saying that when you are putting in young Finnish women, and I think they are now around 1,100 that are doing the national service this year in Finland, compared to the males, you are trying to select those who are really good on technology into positions, and they're doing an extreme well done job, and I'm very surprised how quick they adapt. Same for us, they're good.
You speak females.
Both females and males.
Of course. And
So
humans are humanly adaptable, obviously.
And around 60% of the females coming into your military service also take leadership education. A lot higher than men.
That's interesting how you compare the... I don't understood exactly what you spoke about the Viking period and history. You know, like in Finland, it's very clear. So as part of Sweden, we were up to 1809. We didn't have a conscription army those days. It was ruotuväkilaitokset, so I don't know how you call it but it was clearly that landowners in a certain village, certain areas had to give army, had to give conscripts to the royal for the service. So it wasn't conscript in a way that everybody should do, but there are certain obligations for landowners that you should give. And clearly on those medieval times, of course, they were primarily professional armies owned by kingdoms or knights or whoever who recruited, etc., etc. But you might be, there are different maybe definitions. Technology development, yes, that's true. There might be certain developments you know much better than I do in terms of how armament structures have changed and how easy they are to utilize and not utilize, etc., etc. I cannot comment on that.
I'm saying this because I've just come out of Afghanistan, and yes, we are struggling seriously with, call it the Taliban. And they don't have very much basic military skills, but yes, they are quite challenging with Kalashnikovs and explosives and standard boat communication.
No, it's obviously
But
clear
so,
that
yes,
that's why I think that the new concept for modern warfare situations, security situation, is that we are speaking more and more an asymmetric war type of situation. But we have a modern technology, even zero people are dying even we attack like NATO bombings in Belgrade, etc., etc. Not a single man died, although there were several thousand people who died in Belgrade 1999. So obviously the situation is different, but then Taliban's, ISIS and others, the only ways for them is obviously asymmetric ones. They are reacting because they have problems, whatever aggressions they have, and they are obviously attacking with the suicide bombers, etc., etc. Suddenly are here, and we call them terrorism. We don't call it terrorism when we are attacking their villages and those areas in Libya or in Iraq or in Syria, etc., etc. That's the different way of conceptualization. For them, every bomb which is coming from air and killing the people, my villages, obviously is a military movement. They can call it as a terror, and that's why they don't have the same machinery, same technique to respond. So they say they suicide bombers here, and then we see it. So obviously it's an asymmetric war, and the other side uses those methods which are most devastating. I am only afraid that because they potentially could have also their weapons of mass destructions. Now they have suicide bombers, but they might come, of course, the nuclear weapons, we speaking of North Korea, etc., etc. But I'm very afraid about the biological warfare issues, etc., etc. Are we ready for that one? That if the situation polarizes and we use our modern techniques against them, they will use their techniques, what they can do, and we will be very, very vulnerable suddenly. If let's say, you know much better than I do, but if let's say certain type of biological warfare they are using, then it's a huge catastrophe for our population. So that's why I'm so much a man for not trusting military means of solving political problems, but using diplomacy and foreign policy and other areas. The military side is only behind, not in the forefront, and unfortunately it's too much in forefront nowadays discussions, and that's the situation. Sorry to put it blunt way, how I see it.
but again, our French colleagues, for instance, their police, their military, and primarily for safety and security for the public back home, are seriously overstretched. And the French, of course, have kept the law about national service. They're definitely looking into the possibility of reintroducing it.
Okay.
The Dutch, the same. The Brits, a little different, but yes, they're also seriously overstretched. And in Belgium, it's only a number of events, and yes, they are seriously overstretched. So I think once you have a problem back home, you need a lot more resources to provide safety and security for society than only professional forces.
Imply also in Spain, when the Catalonians are trying to get rid of that, you need to mobilize the people because of polarization.
So I'm only saying that this is very close to if you get a society where people feel they are threatened. You need more police. You need to see them. They need to be more visible to provide safety and security. And you have to rely on the government doing a larger job. And very often, Norway, Finland, we have a very slim police force. We see that there are hotspots or black holes, to use that expression, in Sweden, where the government is not present. If there is a fire, you don't see the fire team going in. If there is somebody wounded or sick, you don't necessarily see ambulances going in after dark. So we have a challenge which is also domestic, not only external. And very often you need to have some sort of governmental structure where you can give the population safety enough. And I think national service in that context is a very important tool. But again, national service is also kind of taking away a little of your privacy. You have to use half a year or 1 year or reserve time to support the government when required. And I said, in good times, we don't necessarily look too much into that, but once in a while, shit happens. And I think Finland has been very good at planning your total defense. It's not only about the military, it's not only about the police, it's also about civil services that can fill out when required. So I'm very impressed, seen as a good neighbor and having the opportunity to live in Finland. You get a lot of good resources out to support society when required. And I think it's very good using it flexibly. So we are trying to do a little of the same, but we made it rust away a little. We've never taken it away, total defense kind of system. You've kept it up. Swedish colleagues took the civilian part of total defense out in the early 1990s. They're struggling seriously to take it up. And one of the reasons for the big exercise now was to get it up again. So I think you're doing a lot of good things, and I'm very impressed.
Good. Vielä nyt on aikaa vissiin muutama 10 minuuttia, varttitunti, mutta tässä on aika paljon keskusteltu. Juuso, jatketaan vielä, jos tulee kysymys.
Kyllä kysyä englanniksi. Time of mass armies may be over, but how do you plan to attract enough people into the service if it's only voluntary basis? I mean, you still need manpower, nevertheless, despite of the technological advances.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
As I mentioned, most of the European Union countries have moved away from conscription army, although he mentioned that there are certain new tendencies, new thoughts, but nevertheless they are surviving very well with the voluntary, more motivated people in army than having it as a national service obligation. You said very interesting way, obviously, that if you have a voluntary service, you don't get into the army the best brains. That was quite interesting argument for us to also thought, but nevertheless I think so that's a way. My analysis, if you ask really my opinion, obviously in a longer term in the world, if we are really looking longer term in the world, this type of national services or army giving defense or security is an anachronism. We live in a world sooner or later where that's not the way of defending our securities. There are obviously violences in the world, that I understand. There are problems, humans are humans. But this type of mobilizing young generation for army services and thinking that you are becoming a man or you are educating the people, giving leadership capacities, capabilities, etc., etc. Modern leadership is not commanding, it's much more cooperating and learning in different ways. That's my own things, and that's what I'm saying. There's real security in the society in Finland, in Norway. It's not so how much we have army. It's how well we are doing our foreign policy, security policy in broader terms, our diplomacy, our approach towards our world. That's obviously is more important than that you have muscles. That's my position, and that's why my analysis comes from that angle. But that's an opinion. Okay. That's more opinion than anything else.
Vielä keskustelun tynkää. Some more ideas or questions? Or are we closing then? Thank you very much for the idea of how to arrange the conscription in Norway. I think it's interesting and very effective, and something we should take example of.
I think you will have a discussion more on the political level about gender equality. There will always be a little difference between men and ladies. Men will not kind of have kids. It is the females kind of being mothers. So yes, there will always be a little difference. But I think when societies are changing, it will be more equality and earlier on. And if you want to bring that into also the defense forces, it's a political decision. And I guess you have parliaments like we do, and it was a parliament initiative.
Yeah,
And, I think we were all a little cautious about how is this going to end.
yeah.
But it seems to be very successful, and I very much appreciate that. That is how we see it today.
I would say a bit same, but in different ways. Let's put it those ways. The difference between male and female, as important the difference is, and I admire the difference existing. Nevertheless, in terms of children, it's more that the ladies are delivering. That's true, but and they are mothers in that way. But we are fathers also in the same processes. But if your point was to say anyhow at the end that it's a political decision how we treat different genders, I'm fully in agreement with you that equal opportunities, equal chances, equal obligations should be treated. If women want to be, now we allow the women to be part of the army structures, I would say absolutely the similar approach should be for the male.
Similar in Norway.
Yes, exactly. So that if man wants to go to army, like female wants to go to army, then you go. If you don't, then don't apply. Or obviously in Finland it's nowadays so that there is the obligation for men, we should do it, the obligation also for female. Maybe that's it, then the case if we are creating equality on those terms, but still I'm more, there's an opinion more than anything else, more in the same way, it's that approach that we don't need to mobilize all the people in army national services in Finland. That could be quote-unquote more professionally done, and that's like police forces is a professional group. The army would be also a professional group, which is obviously led by the politicians in the country, that they are serving as you are putting it, serving the country and the politics in the country and everything else. That's my if we have army. That's
I think
today.
gender discussions are very much a political issue, and of course supported by discussions and media. If we go a number of years ago, we did not see, even if we promoted more females on boards in both government and business, we did not necessarily see it being any significant change in business. So we put in a law, 40% minimum have to be females on boards. If you want to be a legalized business, you have to have it that way. Of course, it took some time to get it in, because you didn't have that many females who were experts a number of years ago on sitting on boards. But once that was implemented, very acceptable, it functions very well. And in fact, some of our, I would say, research studies looking into this says that boards now have a better leadership than they had before.
In gender ways, jokingly I'm saying that the quotas, gender quotas, are actually at the final and defending male. Because in politics you see already now that females are taking all the positions at quota, like that we have this 40% quota, that even then we had the representation for male there in the future. Jokingly partly, but then when you are in that situation that it's roughly already equal, you don't need a quotas as a matter of fact. But I understood that in transition period it's useful to have it.
But again, if you go now to higher education, you have a lot more than 50% of those being students are female than male. So we may have a challenge in the future. Should we have quotas for males in certain studies? we really don't know.
I can give you one example in Finnish Foreign Service, Minister of Foreign Affairs. In terms of the courses they organized for recruits, it's clearly, if it would be totally based on the qualities, etc. So 80% would be females. It's 80%, 20% of males. They need nowadays already quota somewhat. They are selecting males in order to keep the gender equality. That's some party saying, joking that these quotas are maybe depending at the end. In certain professions.
This is why I'm saying that this is very much a political issue. And different traditions, different cultures weigh some factors a little differently. I'm not promoting the Norwegian model because that is something you have to decide by yourselves. But I think we've been so far, even if it's not kind of a very long experience period, it seems to function quite well.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Kiitos. Kiitos paljon.
Thanks very much.